When you look at the Jewish year, there are certain subjects that come up over and over again, certain values, commemoration of certain events, like the Exodus from Egypt, which not only is celebrated on Pesach, but there are various mitzvos that we do because we were slaves in Egypt. Shabbos every week is a memorial to the Exodus from Egypt, saying Kiddush. So the experience in Egypt and the freedom from slavery is something which comes up over and over again. The subject of receiving the Torah and studying the Torah, yes, there's a once-a-year holiday dedicated to it, Shavuos, but it's a subject that comes up over and over again, one that's repeated is constantly in our minds. Sukkot celebrates an aspect of divine providence. When we were in the wilderness, the clouds of glory protected us, but divine providence is a subject that we talk about all the time. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, although they are the days of judgment once a year, and Yom Kippur is a day for judgment and for doing tshuva, for repairing our past failures and improving, but those subjects are repeated every day. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help us do tshuva, and we ask to be forgiven for our failures. And then you have sometimes an event which is unique. Purim happens once a year. Certainly what we do on Purim happens only once a year. There's no other time during the year when we get dressed up in costumes and make jokes and dedicate ourselves to a drinking party, because the banquet on Purim, unlike any other banquet that we have during the year, is designated as Mishteh. Mishteh means a drinking party. We have Seudos during the rest of the year. A Seudah is a banquet at which there may be wine, but it's not the point of the Seudah to drink wine. That's not the focus of the Seudah. How do we look at something that happens only once a year? Is it less important? Something that doesn't, or is it something that doesn't need constant reinforcement? It's naturally understood, naturally part of our character, so that the others we are weaker at and need constant reinforcement because we're fighting an uphill battle against our basic nature, whereas in the case of Purim, we are doing something which is part of our nature. There is a chazal, and I think this chazal has to be handled with great care. I'll tell you what it says, what it means. It means even if circumstances were such that all the holidays couldn't be observed, not that they won't be, there'll be a time that, but even if, for example, if the government said, if you observe a holiday, we'll kill you. So you don't have to lose your life in order to perform the mitzvahs of a holiday, even Shabbos. You don't have to lose your life rather than violate Shabbos. There are certain mitzvahs for which you have to lose your life, but the holidays are not among them. Even if there were circumstances under which the rest of the holidays could not be performed, Purim is going to be preserved. Purim is going to be preserved. Because the Megillah says, these days shall not pass from your descendants, from your people. They will not pass away. And that isn't said about any other holiday. But then the question is, why is that so important? Why, if it happens only once a year and doesn't get great emphasis the rest of the normal times, why then should this be the one that will never pass away? I think that I don't have a total answer to this question, and maybe there isn't such a thing as a total answer. Maybe there are endless dimensions that could be incorporated to understand. But I have some suggestions that I think may shed some light on the question. Purim is the only holiday that celebrates an event which could be mistaken for purely natural. Every other holiday that celebrates an event, the event is miraculous in a way that can't be denied. Whether it's the plagues in Egypt and the Exodus, or the revelation at Sinai, or the clouds of glory that accompanied us in the wilderness, which were clearly miraculous, or Hanukkah, in which the oil that was sufficient for one night burned for 8 nights. These were obviously supernatural events. In the case of Purim, each of the events was clearly natural. Only the sequence, if you look carefully at the sequence, you can see that it's so improbable that it doesn't look purely natural. And it takes place in exile. Having been exiled from the land of Israel, when we have no central authority, because we are a scattered, conquered minority. Achashverosh is a king over 127 provinces. We don't have one of those. We don't have a province. We're a stateless, geographyless, institutionless people. No king, no organized legislative body. Yes, there was a Sanhedrin, but Jews were scattered. There was no central control. Outside the holiness of the land of Israel. So the context in which we were living was a context of immersion in a world in which God's presence is not manifest. This is what's reflected in the fact that the Megillah Esther doesn't have God's name in it, which, by the way, is pointed out often, and it just should be noted as a footnote that it's not the only book in the Bible, not the only sefer in the Tanakh that doesn't have God's name in it. There's another one. Song of Songs doesn't have God's name either. And perhaps you could think about that and wonder why those two and not the others. But the book reads as a book of events that took place without God's name being mentioned. The natural laws that run the world in which we live, which are the inanimate laws of physics and chemistry, biology, or the animate laws of economics and sociology and military science, psychology, and the rest, they seem to be in control of the events that take place, except, as I said, for a certain dovetailing of the events that makes it suggests that it's not purely natural, that there's some kind of hidden force that's guiding the events to their conclusion. So, for example, Mordechai overhears 2 of the king's servants plotting to assassinate him. It so happens they're speaking a foreign language, and they are unaware that there's anyone in the area who understands that language, let alone a Jew. He hears them and understands them. He reveals the plot to Esther. Esther reveals the plot to the king. And thereby the king's life is saved. If you observe that, would you classify that as a miracle? I mean, there are plots against kings all the time. Most of the plots are foiled, otherwise would hardly pay to be king because you'd have a short life. Mordechai happened to be there. They didn't know that he was an educated Jew who knew other languages. I don't think anybody observing that event would think, look how divine providence runs the world. The king's life is saved. He doesn't reward Mordechai for saving his life. Wouldn't you expect a king whose life is saved to reward the one who saved him, so as to encourage other people to save his life, so that he could have a longer life? Yeah, I think you would expect that. It is unusual that he shouldn't do it. But then, who saved his life? A Jew? Jews are of absolutely no account. Jews have no status, no place. A Jew's beneath, not worthy of notice. After all, when Mordechai doesn't bow down to Haman, and Haman is enraged, why doesn't he take revenge right away? Because he says, it's not worthy. It'll be embarrassing. People will ask me, you noticed the Jew? It bothered you? Would an ant crawling across your path bother you? Why wasn't that trivial? Why wasn't that completely meaningless to you? You're so worried about what a Jew does? That's why he didn't take revenge against Mordechai directly. That's why he went after the Jewish people as a whole, because going after a whole people, in order to enhance the security of the kingdom, that's something that a prime minister does. That's worthy of a prime minister's attention. He's not going to be embarrassed by doing that. His real intention is to get at Mordechai, but he goes after the kingdom. So it's not so terribly unusual that the king should not want to or not take notice of rewarding Mordechai. So now, years later, Haman has this hatred against Mordechai and plans to destroy the whole of the Jewish people, and then he can't stand it. He can't stand even that excuse. And he's coming into the palace of the king in order to get the king to hang Mordechai right away. That night, the king can't sleep. So he calls for his book to be read, and if you look carefully in the text, it doesn't call it Divrei Hayomim, it calls it Sefer HaZichronos. Sefer HaZichronos is the book of memorandum, things to be remembered. So that's, I think, where Chazal explain that this is a book of debts the king owes and when and if they were paid. And his feeling was, if I can't sleep, something's bothering me. There's something going on that my spirit isn't comfortable. Maybe it's a signal that I owe somebody something. So he asks his servants to read the book, and the book just happens to be open to the parchment where it records that Mordechai saved the king's life. And the king says, Mordechai saved my life. Did we do anything to reward him? And the servants say, well, the book is empty. It doesn't say anything. It just says he saved your life. Oh, says the king, that's terrible. We have to do something about that. Okay, now, look at the irony. Haman's coming in to get the king to hang Mordechai, and the king is planning how to honor Mordechai for saving his life. Isn't that a delicious irony? When they hit, there's going to be an explosion, right? So the king says to Haman, what should the king do for someone whom the king wants to honor? And the text testifies. Haman says, who does the king want to honor more than me? After all, I'm prime minister. So he concocts this very elaborate honor, and the king says, do it for Mordechai. So now at this point, I think the reader becomes a little suspicious. Is this likely to happen? Isn't this very improbable to happen? That just when he wants to kill him, the king wants to honor him? Here I think there's a parting of the ways. One person will say, it looks to me like there's some kind of hidden agency here that brought this about. And that's correct. And then there are people who are committed to explaining things naturalistically, no matter what. No matter what. And they will concoct the most outrageous hypotheses, imaginations, in order to make sure that they don't have to acknowledge anything that goes beyond their picture of nature. It's a slippery area. There's a wonderful professor of statistics in Britain with whom I had very kind correspondence. He was very kind to me, Professor David Hand, where he wrote a book called Why Miracles Happen Every Day. The improbable. Why the improbable happens often. Hey, there's a whole statistical analysis, part of which I think is definitely accurate, and because when you consider how many people win the lottery twice, well, how many lotteries are there? How many drawings are there? How many tickets per lottery are there? When you take the number of people, the number of drawings, the fact that occasionally one person will win the lottery twice is not so terribly surprising. You think of one lottery, but there are thousands of lotteries in scores of countries. So things that you think of as very improbable do happen. They do happen. And therefore you could say, well, here too it was just a matter of luck. When you look at the way in which it happened to the Jewish people who have a history, and you put it together with the fact that Esther is queen, how did Esther get to be queen? Well, there was that celebration at the beginning of the Megillah, 6 months worth. They knew how to party. They could teach Los Angeles something, I think, a 6-month bash. And then at the end of an extra week, and the king required Vashti to make an appearance, and she said no, because she's the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and she doesn't owe anything to the king. So there's this conflict, this challenge to the king's authority, and one of his advisors puts a spin on it, a kind of feminist spin on the rebellion, and says to the king, you want to be popular with all the people of the kingdom who count? Translation, the people of the kingdom who count are the men, of course. You want to be popular with all the men? Make a decree that all the men should rule in their own houses, that none of the women should raise their heads. Because Vashti rebelled against you, you're going to make a decree against all the women in favor of all the men. So she's out. And now somebody has to be chosen for queen. They go looking for beautiful women. Esther's taken into the group, and she's chosen. Well, somebody had to be chosen. Over 1,000 women were tried before she was chosen. So whoever gets chosen is a very improbable choice. That doesn't mean whoever you choose is a miracle. You don't necessarily see that as a miracle. But later, when there's a decree against the Jewish people, and she's right in the position to plead on behalf of the Jewish people, when you see that dovetailing of the events, a person who looks for the way in which events relate to one another and sees a pattern, the way good scientists do, you see a pattern, then you say there's got to be an explanation for the pattern. But each of the events, the way in which they take place, is fully natural. Here we have a picture of something which none of the other events that we celebrate has, and that is divine providence almost completely covered up. Not only that, not only is it almost completely covered up, but until you get to the end of the story, it is completely covered up. Because if you were there at the 6-month bash, you wouldn't see anything supernatural about that. If you were there and Esther is chosen, if you have a lottery, have 1 million tickets, whoever wins is 1 in a million chance. That doesn't mean it's supernatural. Somebody had to win. He's going to choose somebody to be queen. He chose her. And the incident with Mordechai, all of that, until you get to the end, was covered up. No one could see that it was miraculous. There's a message here. The message is that when you live in a period of time, in a piece of geography, in circumstances where you don't see divine providence directly, you have to understand that the divine providence is hidden, not absent. It's just hidden. The events are being manipulated into a conclusion, just as much as they are when the HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals his presence. Now, on the one hand, we live with this all the time. We live with this appearance of nature all the time. And on the other hand, we have to step above it. Purim is a time when we reflect on the ability that we have to step above it, because sometimes the HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows us how the outcome is And we celebrate it in a way that is very visible, prominent, and unforgettable. We wear costumes because when you see someone lumbering up to your front door, knocking on the door with a big charity box, I'm collecting for the yeshiva, it looks like a gorilla. Now, you know it's not a gorilla, but you may not know who it is. There's somebody inside that suit. But, so you say, I see a gorilla suit, I know it's not a gorilla, I don't know who it is, and he's collecting on Purim for yeshiva. Probably it's good stuff. Probably it's worthwhile. I can take that because I know there's something behind it that I can't see. Same thing when you read the Megillah and God's name doesn't appear, you have to look for the hashgacha in it. Otherwise, you don't see it. So this is a message that we have to internalize, and we have to keep with us. And it's important that the celebration be vivid. Now, some of you probably have heard that this is a fairly well-guarded secret, but you probably have heard there's a mitzvah of drinking on Yom Kippur, on Purim. You know, that's made it through to your consciousness, drinking intoxicating drinks. The purpose of that is also to reveal something that's hidden. When you are sober, your actions are controlled by your intellect. What am I doing? Who's watching? What will be the consequences of what I do? And although sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes you give in to desires or emotions, and you may realize it, but you regret it, and you think, next time I won't do that, because you're under conscious surveillance, conscious observation of your behavior and your feelings, and also almost always under conscious control. A lot of you is hidden. And it's good that it's hidden, because if it were revealed, it could be very embarrassing. When a person gets drunk, a lot of what is hidden comes out. Chazal say that the things that people hide in them come out, bekiso, koso, v'kaso. In his cup, when he's drinking, and in his money, when money is a matter of the consequences. Most marriages break up over money, even if it's there are underlying causes that make money pound, but money is the catalyst for most marriages breaking up. Kiso, koso, and kaso in his anger. When a person is angry, he loses control. When he's angry, he loses control, and that's when things come out that otherwise wouldn't come out. I heard of a couple who were, the man was Jewish, the woman was not Jewish, and they both had absolutely no religious allegiance, no religious behavior or performance, no religious institutions, modern and citizens of the world, and enlightened and educated. They were married for 10 years. Then there was a discussion about money, and the wife let slip the remark, "That's what I would expect from a Jew." He looked at her. "You're saying that? You're expressing anti-Semitism?" Yeah, it was there. And it was there the whole time. It just was under wraps because nothing was pushing her. And now when she got angry about something that he did, she let it slip. So drinking can let out things that you normally keep under cover. Now, why would we want to do that? Why would we want to do that? Do we always want to do that? Wouldn't it matter what it is that's going to come out? I know someone, this happened 40 years ago, a lovely person, full shomer mitzvos, educated in a very important psychological field, got drunk on Purim, and he took his 2-year-old, put him on his shoulders, and he went dancing on the surface of a wall. The drop below was a flight and a half. He was drunk. He didn't know what he was doing. when he was told afterwards that that's what he did, he decided he's never going to get drunk again. Yes, because when you got drunk, you became totally irresponsible. That's what came out. Well, keep that under wraps. Keep that under control. Don't let that out. Somebody could get hurt, you or somebody else. So what is it that drinking is supposed to let out? This is based on a Tikkunei Zohar and other things, which I don't have time to go into in detail now, but here's the bottom line. This is my thought. I don't have this from anybody else. This is my thought. When you are under conscious control, your actions are a result usually of your conscious understanding, your values, your judgment, and your self-control. There are two ways in which a person's actions can be appropriate. One way is, as I just told you, of course I have desires like other people. Of course I have reactions like other people and temptations like other people, but I've worked hard to keep control. And I'm very successful. When you look at me, you see somebody who's in control and his actions are a product of his exerting control. That's one possibility. But there's another possibility that by training yourself to act in the appropriate way, you elevate even your what's called Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, your body, your desires, your impulses, your emotions, also to be in tune with what ought to be done, with what's good to be done, what's noble to be done, so that it isn't a struggle anymore. It's not a matter of controlling, stopping, forcing wild impulses and inappropriate desires into a channel where they'll operate appropriately. You get to the point where the desires and the emotions are in tune with what the neshama wants. You're a single, integrated body, and in that way, you're not exerting control. It's built in because you've trained it. In this respect, the body especially is like a wild horse. You don't say, the horse is wild, so let's shoot it. No, you break it. You train it. You can tame a horse. By the way, I was just in a zoo with my wife, and somebody told us there that you can't train zebras. You can't tame zebras. They just don't take. That's why you don't ever see anybody riding a zebra. Even in a circus show, they don't ride zebras because zebras won't take it. But a horse will take it. The body's like a horse. It can be trained. It can become responsive to what you want it to do, instead of being rebellious. There are many sources for this idea. So now, when a person gets drunk, the activity of the uncontrolled body shows itself. And if the person has succeeded in training the body, in elevating the body, and I would put it like this, spiritualizing the body, then it is a beautiful thing to see. Because what you see is that when we look at body and soul as opposed to one another, in tension with one another, pulling in opposite directions, which is true, it's true, certainly that's how you start out in life. It's not because the body is somehow inherently evil. It's not inherently evil. It was created by the same God that created the soul, after all. We are monotheists. Everything comes from the same source. It's something which is naturally blind to what's moral and spiritual, and therefore it will often pull in a direction that's against the moral and spiritual, but natural blindness can be overcome. In the beginning, because you are its eyes, your neshama, which sees the truth, becomes the eyes of the body, and the power of the will is used to draw the body after what the eyes see, to the extent that after a while, the body itself, I know people who, I have a grandson who does horse equestrian therapy. Wonderful thing to do therapy, especially for autistic children and adults who can't relate to people. It's hard for them to relate to people, but they relate to animals. And so he trains the horses, and he also does the therapy with horses. Those horses, when he tells me, when you sit on them, if you nudge it with your knee, it knows exactly what to do. By the amount of pressure, it knows how fast to go, how slow to go, how much to slow down, to turn right, to turn left. They become like another part of your body. They respond to you just like your body responds to you. They've been trained to express what you wanted to express. No rebelliousness there at all. That can happen to the body also. Now, if a person has achieved that and he gets drunk, and when he gets drunk on Purim, what gushes out of him is love of God and love of the Torah and love of fellow Jews and love of mitzvos. What you get is a vision of the unity of the human being. Rather than the duality of soul and body, which are in tension with one another, which are at odds with one another, you get a vision of the unity, the fact that God can speak to the person from the body. Body doesn't have to be imposed on and controlled and forced. The body too can speak God's language. The pasuk, from my own flesh I can see God. That pasuk has many meanings, many applications, but I would say this is one of them. So, just like God's name is hidden in the Megillah, and God's providence is hidden in the events of history which surround us as need to be purely natural, God's essence is hidden in the body, which looks non-spiritual, which looks non-moral, which looks as if it has no direct expression of godliness. Is not true. The expression of godliness is there. It has to be extracted. It has to be focused. But then it can speak clearly. And if that's what the drinking reveals, then it's a very valuable thing to see. If that's not what the drinking reveals, then, to my mind, it doesn't play the role that it was designed to play on Purim. Now, having said all of that, let me fill in the legal background briefly, because otherwise I'll be accused of distorting the law, and it would be true. The Gemara says that you should drink to the point where you don't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. Baruch Mordechai and Or Haman. If you do the math, you'll see that both those phrases have the same gematria. So one cute explanation is, you get drunk to the point where you can't do the math. Sure. Now let's see, a reish is 200. Was there another reish? Yeah, but what about the vav? Right? And then, as a matter of fact, can't tell the difference because you can't do the math and you can't tell what the values are. The Mechaber, the Sfardi Posek, who wrote basic text of the Shulchan Aruch, copies the Gemara word for word, and it's Sfardim. I don't know what the practice is, but certainly it would be appropriate for them to get drunk. Take into account what I said. Have people watching you that you don't do things that are foolish and destructive. Try to live up to elevating the body so that when you drink, this is what gets expressed. But if someone says, "Look, I follow what the Gemara says, what the Shulchan Aruch says, what my posek the Mechaber says, and it's not up to me to follow your philosophy," I think he's perfectly justified in doing that. But if you are an Ashkenazi and you're not going to volunteer to become a Sephardi for a day, which does happen, I think, the Ramah says, drink a little more than you're used to drinking and take a nap. When you're asleep, you don't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Or Haman. So if you're an Ashkenazi, that's what the Ashkenazi with authority says. And again, there'll be people who do it differently. I'm not criticizing anybody. Everybody has his own customs. Everybody has his own community. Just pointing out that if you're looking for the legal background, this is what it is. And for the Ashkenazim, it's certainly appropriate. My Rabbi Zatzal told me not to get drunk. Told all of us not to get drunk. Boston Rabbi. And there are others who say the same thing. So, this is another aspect of revealing something that's otherwise hidden. Now, there's one more element that I want to share with you. The Gemara says that on Purim, the Jewish people made a new commitment to the Torah. They accepted the Torah upon themselves in a new way. Because, as you have probably heard, at Sinai, at the revelation, God held the mountain over their heads. That's a kind of coercion. Either accept it or this is your end. Having accepted it via coercion, I'm leaving out a lot. There's Nasav and Ishmael also, but this is part of what went on there. It's not a fully, completely free-willed acceptance. And therefore it's not wholehearted. The Gemara says that in Purim, Kimu v'kiblu, they confirmed that which they had received earlier, centuries earlier. They confirmed their commitment to the Torah again. Rashi says on that Gemara, me'avas hanes, from the love of the miracle. Now let's see. Given what I just told you, that sounds a little funny. This is supposed to be wholehearted now. Unlike when they had the mountain over their heads, where part of the motivation was to save their lives, this is supposed to be wholehearted. What happened over here? Their lives were saved. So, sounds like just gratitude for something that's selfish, self-centered. We were decreed to be slaughtered, and God saved us. And here, I want to make use of an analysis of the Kedushas Levi, of Levi Yisrael Radichev, who said that when you are considering a miracle, depending upon what kind of miracle it is, but usually there are two different ways to look at the miracle. And it's the same miracle, but the attitude, what psychologists, cognitive psychologists would call framing. You frame the miracle in a different way, and therefore it has a different meaning for you. Let's suppose that George is drowning. A bolt of lightning strikes a tree at the shore. The tree caves into the water, and he holds onto the trunk, and he saves himself. Bolt of lightning strikes it just as he's drowning. So here's one way to look at it. Wow! I was dead. I was gone. There was no chance that I was going to survive. A bolt of lightning hit the tree. The tree fell in. I grabbed onto it, and I'm alive. I'm alive. This saved my life. Why did this happen? Bolt of lightning hit it just now? Just in a way that it would fall in? That's not natural. That's not normal. That almost never happens. It must be that God did it. It must have been a miracle. Thank you. You saved my life. I'm so grateful for you having saved my life. That's one way to look at the miracle. But there's another way. And that is, let's see, I was in the water and I was drowning. The bolt of lightning hit the tree and the tree fell over just to where I was. That's clearly a miracle. God showed himself to me. God showed me a miracle. Almost all the time, God's activity in the world is hidden. Here he revealed it to me. What a precious moment that God revealed himself to me. Oh, yes, now let's see. He revealed himself to me, and therefore, and therefore my life was saved. That's true. Yes, I was going to die. But that's secondary, that's tertiary, that's a footnote. The real preciousness of the miracle is that God showed himself to me. He raised his hand out to me. He showed me that he wants me to be conscious of him, wants me to connect with him. There are two different ways to take the miracle. I hope that that's what Rashi means. Rashi means what the Kedushas Levi says. From the love of the miracle, not that their lives were saved, and they were grateful to God for the miracle of their lives being saved. But they were grateful to God that he's manipulating the history in such a way that he shows himself, that he's present to them. And this goes back to what I said about having to analyze the events to see that they're miraculous. It's the dovetailing of the events that shows you that this didn't happen by accident. Now, you could have been shown that without this being life-saving. The events could have dovetailed with a different kind of outcome. Here, the crucial thing is the fact that the events were dovetailed together, and that's something which you appreciate, that God showed himself that his providence is operating, and that would be the essence of it. From the love of that, they accepted it, that would be a wholehearted acceptance, not a selfish acceptance at all. The final thing I want to tell you, this is something which just came to me this year. It was actually about a week ago. Maybe it's obvious to others, but it just came to me. Everybody points out that Haman had the gallows, the tree, set up to hang Mordechai, 50 cubits high. Why that high? Because his wife and his friends advised him, the banqueting hall in the palace has a window. And from that window, if it's 50 cubits high, you'll be able to see the tree. And if Mordechai's hanging on it, you'll be very happy at the banquet, and you'll be able to look out the window and see your enemy hanging from the tree. So he built it. What was the result? The result was that when Esther points to Haman and says, he's the enemy, he's the one who wants to kill me and kill the Jewish people, and I can't stand to see my people destroyed, and the king is overwrought with this terrible turn of events. When he comes back into the room, and Haman's falling on the couch where Esther is, Charvaina, a real politico, says to the king, and you know what, king? Look out the window. See that gallows hanging there? Haman set that up to kill Mordechai, who spoke well of the king. And so the king says, hang him on it. So the gallows is 50 cubits high, so that Haman can see it and rejoice seeing Mordechai hanging there. That's what's used to hang Haman, because it's visible. So Charvaina pointed out to the king. So his plan to kill Mordechai was used against him. Now, here's the question I would like to ask. Does God ever do that to tzaddikim also? Tzaddik chooses a goal because he believes it's right. And he creates a strategy. And in fact, the strategy leads to the opposite of his goal. And it's the opposite of his goal that's right. It's the opposite of his goal that's good. Does God ever do that with tzaddikim also? I think he does. I think he did it in the Megillah. Because if you look at the first chapter, the king had a problem with Vashti. She was a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And therefore she said to the king, I don't need you. I don't need you. I have the royal blood flowing in my veins. You're not a real king. And therefore, when he said she should make an appearance, she said, drop dead. Don't tell me what to do. You can't tell me what to do. And that caused a crisis of authority, and he had to get out of it. And I told you there was a feminist spin on what she did. He goes looking for a queen. What's the criteria for the queen? Beauty and pleasing the king. Sof pasuk. End of story. No yichus. She shouldn't come from anybody great. No money. No brains. No experience. Just pretty and please the king. I don't want competition. I want it to be my plaything. So that if I don't like her, out she goes. I'm not having another Vashti. Okay. So there, all these women are gathered. And he's going to choose one of them. Mordechai says to Esther, don't reveal who you are. Who is Esther? She's in the line going back to Shaul HaMelech. She comes from a king. Don't reveal who you are. Mordechai's thought is, if the king finds out that she comes from royal lineage, he will want her. Let's protect her. Let's hide it so that she won't be chosen. The very fact that she hid it is why she was chosen. Had she revealed it, she wouldn't have been chosen. It's the exact opposite of what Mordechai wanted. The outcome was that because she hid her lineage, that's why she was chosen. That, for Mordechai, was a disaster. That's what he was trying to prevent. But that was the salvation. So Kadosh Baruch Hu did to Mordechai parallel to what he did to Haman. Mordechai chose a goal and chose a strategy. The strategy he chose achieved the opposite goal, the goal he was trying to avoid, and that was the real salvation. So it means this way of manipulating the events in a way that you don't know what's really happening You can't appreciate what's really happening. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't use that only for Rishonim, for the wicked. He uses it for righteous people as well. And therefore, when things happen to us, and we don't know why, we don't see the connections, we can't figure out the direction, we have to realize that they're in the hands of divine providence, which always wants what's best for everyone involved, even though we may not know why, and it's very hard to predict the outcome. Very hard to predict the outcome. Sometimes it takes 10, 20, or 30 years before you can see the significance of what happened at a certain time. And in the meantime, knowing Jewish history, knowing the things that we have that are taught in the tradition, one has to develop patience to be able to say that there is something that's planned here, and it is planned for the good of everyone concerned, including myself, and I should accept it, and even accept it with a measure of happiness, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for me. Okay, some thoughts about the Megillah and about Purim.